But all at once the whole hill grew dark, as though the light had gone out of the sun. It was almost pitch dark, and in the darkness above, the crucified man cried out in a loud voice,
my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
It sounded horrible. Whatever did he mean? And why had it grown dark? It was the middle of the day. It was quite unaccountable. The 3 crosses were just faintly visible up there. It looked weird. Something terrible was surely going to happen. The soldiers had leapt to their feet and grabbed their weapons. Whatever happened, they always rushed for their weapons. They stood there around the crosses with their lances, and he heard them whispering together in alarm. Now they were frightened. Now they were grinning. They were not grinning any longer. They were superstitious, of course. He was afraid himself, and glad when it began to get light and everything became a little more normal. It got light slowly, as it does at dawn. The daylight spread across the hill, and the olive trees around about, and the birds that had been silent started twittering again. It was just like dawn.
The relatives up there were standing so still. There was no longer any sound of weeping and lamentation from them. They just stood looking up at the man on the cross. Even the soldiers did so. Everything had grown so still. Now he could go whenever he liked, for it was all over now, and the sun shone again and everything was just as usual. It had only been dark for a while because the man had died. The true believer grew so impatient at last that he bent down and picked up a large sharp stone, which he hurled with all his senile might at the hair-lipped girl. It did in fact hit her, and she staggered and raised her spindly arms in a rather helpless way. The mob gave a wild shriek of approval, and the true believer stood looking down at his work, clearly pleased with it. Barabbas, stepping right up to him, lifted his mantle slightly and stuck a knife into him with a deft movement that bespoke long practice. It happened so quickly that no one noticed anything. And besides, they were all so busy casting their stones down onto the victim. Barabbas pushed his way through to the edge, and there, down in the pit, he saw the girl with the hair lip stagger forward a step or two with outstretched hands, crying out,
"He has come! He has come! I see him! I see him!"
She fell to her knees, and it was as though she seized hold of the hem of someone's garment as she snuffled,
"Lord, how can I witness for thee? Forgive me! Forgive!"
Then sinking down on the blood-stained stones, she gave up the ghost. When it was all over, those immediately around discovered that a man lay dead amongst them, while another man was seen to run off between the vineyards and disappear into the olive groves over towards the Vale of Kidron. Several of the guard gave chase, but were unable to find him. It was as if the earth had swallowed him up.
The overseer often stopped to speak to Sahak as he passed by. Barabbas he never spoke to. And he got Sahak to tell him more about his Lord, about his life and his miracles, and about his strange doctrine that we should all love one another. And one day, the overseer said,
I too have long been thinking of believing in this God, but how can I? How can I believe in anything so strange? And I, who am an overseer of slaves, how can I worship a crucified slave?
Sahak replied that his Lord had admittedly died a slave's death, but that in actual fact he was God himself. Yes, the only God. If one believes in him, one can no longer believe in any other.
The only God? And crucified like a slave? What presumption! Do you mean that there is supposed to be only one God, and that people crucified him?
Yes, Sahak said, that is how it is. The man gazed at him, dumbfounded. And shaking his head, as was his habit, he went on his way, vanishing into the dark passage of the mine. They stood looking after him, caught a glimpse of him for a second by the next oil lamp, and then he was gone. But the overseer was thinking of this unknown God, who was merely become more incomprehensible the more he heard about him. Supposing he was really the only God, that it were to him one should pray and none other, supposing there were only one mighty God who is master of heaven and earth, and who proclaimed his teaching everywhere, even down here in the underworld, a teaching so remarkable that one could not grasp it. Love one another. Love one another. No, who could understand that?
And so they were led out to be crucified. They were chained together in pairs, and, as they were not an even number, Barabbas came last in the procession, not chained to anyone. It just turned out like that. In this way, too, it happened that he hung furthest out in the row of crosses. A large crowd had collected, and it was a long time before it was all over. But the crucified spoke consolingly and hopefully to each other the whole time. To Barabbas, nobody spoke.
When dusk fell, the spectators had already gone home, tired of standing there any longer, And besides, by that time the crucified were all dead. Only Barabbas was left hanging there alone, still alive. When he felt death approaching, that which he had always been so afraid of, he set out into the darkness as though he were speaking to it. To thee I deliver up my soul. And then he gave up the ghost.